A young man, forced out of college and with nowhere to go, inherits a single key to a derelict barn. But what he discovered inside wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a final, desperate message from the man who raised him. A message that would force him to choose between a fortune and his grandfather's legacy. If you've ever felt like you've hit rock bottom and had to start over, hit that subscribe button. This story is for you. The bus groaned like an old man getting out of a low chair. Every shift of its gears was a complaint, a rattling sigh that vibrated up through the worn vinyl of my seat and into my bones. I watched the city bleed into the suburbs, and then the suburbs fray into the long, empty stretches of highway that webbed the heart of the country. Each mile was a deliberate step away from the person I was supposed to be. Leo, the scholarship kid, the one who made it out. Now, I was just Leo, and I was going back to a place I barely remembered, with nothing but a backpack, a cardboard box of books I couldn't bear to sell, and a single, heavy, iron key. The key felt cold and ancient in my pocket, a piece of some other century. It was my only inheritance, my only plan. 2 years of late-night study sessions, of instant ramen and the fluorescent hum of the library. All of it had evaporated in a single, sterile meeting with a dean who couldn't quite meet my eyes. He'd used words like academic probation and unfortunate circumstances, but what he meant was failure. My grades had slipped, then plummeted. The scholarship, my lifeline, was gone, and without it, the life I was building was a house of cards in a hurricane. I packed my dorm room in a fog, the cheerful posters on the wall seeming to mock me with a future that was no longer mine. The resident advisor, a kid my age with a bright, easy smile and a clear path forward, had clapped me on the shoulder. "Tough break, man. You'll bounce back." I didn't have the energy to nod. The bus smelled of disinfectant and diesel fumes, a scent I was starting to associate with endings. I leaned my forehead against the cool, vibrating glass. Outside, the sky was a vast, indifferent gray, spitting a fine, miserable drizzle that blurred the passing trees into watery streaks of green and brown. My phone was a dead weight in my pocket. Who would I even call? My aunt, the one who took me in after my grandfather died, had made it clear that her home was a temporary stopover, not a destination. Her last text message, a week ago, was a link to a job fair in a city 3 states away. It was her way of saying, "Your time is up." I couldn't blame her. I was a ghost in her house, a quiet, grieving boy who had overstayed his welcome and then grown into a quiet, failing man. My grandfather was the one who should have been there. He was the anchor, the quiet center of my world after my parents were gone. I was 6 when the state trooper came to the farmhouse door, his hat in his hands. I remember the way my grandfather stood there, his large, calloused hands hanging limp at his sides, his face looking like stone. He didn't cry. Not then, not ever, not where I could see. He just took me by the hand, and his grip was the only thing that felt real in a world that had suddenly dissolved into noise and confusion. He raised me on that farm. He taught me how to read the clouds, how to tell the difference between the scent of rain on dry dirt and rain on wet asphalt. He taught me the quiet dignity of work. And then he lost it all. The farm, the land that had been in our family for 100 years, was sold off piece by piece to pay debts I didn't understand. I was 15 when we moved out. Him to a small rented apartment in town, and me to my aunt's house an hour away, for the better school district. We drifted apart, not from a lack of love, but from the quiet, grinding pressure of poverty and distance. He died 2 years ago, a month after I started college. A heart attack, the doctor said. I told myself he died of a broken heart. It was easier than thinking about the cholesterol and the years of hard living. The key was the final piece of him. It had arrived in the mail on my 21st birthday, 3 weeks ago, in a stiff manila envelope from a law office I'd never heard of. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a deed to 1 acre of land, and the key itself attached to a simple hand-stamped brass tag that read, North Barn. The accompanying letter from the lawyer, a Ms. Evelyn Albright, was brief and formal. It stated that my grandfather, Arthur Vance, had willed this property, his last remaining asset, to me. It was a sliver of the original farm, a piece he had somehow managed to carve out and keep when everything else was swept away. 1 acre, 1 barn. The letter ended with a sterile, "Please feel free to contact our office should you have any questions." I had questions, 1,000 of them. Why the barn? Why not just sell it and leave me the money? Why had he never mentioned it? But I didn't call. I was too ashamed. How could I tell a lawyer that my grandfather's legacy was about to become a homeless shelter for his failing grandson? The bus pulled into the station, a sad-looking depot in the center of a town that seemed to be shrinking in on itself. Peeling paint on the storefronts, faded signs in the windows. I remembered it as a bustling place from my childhood, full of farmers in dusty trucks and the sound of chatter from the diner. Now it was quiet, too quiet. I shouldered my backpack, grabbed my box, and stepped out into the damp air. It smelled of wet pavement and decaying leaves. It smelled like the past. I walked into the general store, the bell above the door jangling with a lonely sound. An old man behind the counter looked up from his newspaper, his eyes narrowed over a pair of reading glasses. "Help you?" he asked, his voice gravelly. "I'm looking for the old Vance farm," I said, my own voice sounding thin and unfamiliar. "Or what's left of it, the North Barn." He stared at me for a long moment, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "You must be Arthur's boy, his grandson." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. "Leo." "Heard you went off to college," the man said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact, and the unspoken follow-up hung in the air between us. "So, what are you doing back here?" "Needed a break," I lied. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. He seemed to accept it, or at least, he didn't challenge it. He gave me directions, pointing a gnarled finger down the main road. "Head out past the old bridge, about 2 miles. You'll see the new development, Maple Creek Estates. All those fancy houses with no trees. Your grandfather's place is just past that. A dirt track on the left. Can't miss the barn. It's the only thing still standing out there." The walk was longer than I expected. The drizzle had thickened into a steady, miserable rain. Cars passed, their tires hissing on the wet asphalt, splashing muddy water onto my jeans. I passed the entrance to Maple Creek Estates, a monument of beige siding and manicured lawns that looked alien and sterile against the backdrop of the gray, moody countryside. It was built on the fields where my grandfather had grown corn, where I had learned to drive a tractor. A wave of anger, cold and sharp, cut through my numbness. This was what had replaced him, this soulless, cookie-cutter world. Just like the man at the store said, a 1/4 mile past the last identical house, a dirt track appeared, almost swallowed by overgrown weeds. A rusted metal gate, held shut with a loop of heavy chain, blocked the way. There was no house, no silo, just the track winding through a field of thorny brush towards a dark, hulking shape on the horizon. The barn. It was bigger than I remembered, a great gray beast of a building slumping against the sky. Its roof sagged in the middle like the spine of an old horse. Half the windows in the hayloft were shattered, dark eyes staring out into the rain. The paint, once a proud, defiant red, had been scoured away by decades of wind and weather, leaving behind a patchwork of silvered, splintering wood. It looked abandoned, haunted, but it was mine. I unlooped the chain, the cold metal biting into my fingers, and pushed the gate open. It screamed on its hinges, a sound of protest that echoed across the empty field. I walked up the track, my boots sinking into the mud. The closer I got, the more dilapidated the barn seemed. A section of the siding had been torn away, revealing the building's skeletal ribs. The main doors, tall enough to drive a combine through, were shut tight, held together by a thick, rusty padlock that looked as old as the barn itself. My heart sank. What if the key didn't fit? What if this was all some colossal mistake, another dead end? I set my box down on a flat stone, my hands trembling slightly as I fished the key from my pocket. It felt impossibly small compared to the massive lock. I took a deep breath, the damp air filling my lungs, and slid the key into the lock. It scraped, resisted for a moment, and then, with a final push, it sank all the way in. I turned it. For a second, nothing happened. I put my shoulder into it, twisting with all my weight. There was a deep, groaning click, a sound that seemed to come from the very guts of the mechanism. The lock sprang open. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost made my knees buckle. I pulled the lock free and slid one of the heavy doors sideways. It screeched and shuddered, scraping along its iron track, opening a slice of darkness into the barn's interior. The smell hit me first. It was a complex and ancient perfume. Dry, dusty hay, the sharp tang of old oil, the earthy scent of packed dirt, and the pervasive, damp smell of rain finding its way through a leaky roof. I stepped inside, out of the rain, and pulled the door shut behind me, plunging myself into near total darkness. I fumbled for my phone, my thumb swiping to turn on the flashlight. The beam cut a clean white cone through the gloom, illuminating a world frozen in time. Dust motes danced in the light like tiny, frantic ghosts. The main floor was vast, a cathedral of timber and shadows. To my left, empty animal stalls stood in a silent row, their wooden gates hanging open. To my right, the hulking shapes of forgotten machinery sat under thick shrouds of dust and cobwebs. A plow, a seeder, a hay rake, all of them relics of a dead era. The air was cold, still, and heavy with the weight of memory. I swept the light upwards. Massive beams, hand-hewn from whole trees, crisscrossed the darkness above, supporting a hayloft that was lost in shadow. Light filtered down in thin, ethereal shafts from the broken windows and the holes in the roof, each one a spotlight on a patch of the dusty floor. It was beautiful, in a sad, forgotten sort of way. I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. This place was a wreck. It was cold and damp and probably full of spiders, and worse. But it was quiet. It asked nothing of me. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I did a slow circuit of the main floor, my footsteps echoing in the immense space. There was a small, enclosed room in the far corner, under the stairs to the loft. The tack room, I guessed. The door was ajar. I pushed it open and pointed my light inside. And that's when I saw it. The first sign that this wasn't just an abandoned building. In the corner of the small room was a metal-framed cot, neatly made with a thick wool blanket and a single flat pillow. Next to it, on an overturned wooden crate, sat a battery-powered lantern, a half-empty book of matches, and a dog-eared paperback novel. Under the cot was a small stash of canned food, beans, soup, tuna, and a plastic jug of water. Someone had been living here, or, at the very least, preparing to live here. It wasn't a dusty, forgotten setup. The blanket was clean. There was no thick layer of grime on the lantern. It looked like someone had just stepped out for a moment. A chill, unrelated to the cold, prickled my skin. Was someone else laying claim to this place? Had I just broken into someone's shelter? My sense of peace evaporated, replaced by a familiar, nervous tension. I backed out of the room, sweeping my light across the main floor again, searching the shadows for any sign of movement. The barn remained silent, empty. My eyes fell on something in the center of the vast, open space. It was the only thing not covered in a uniform layer of dust. A large, dark wooden chest. It was old, bound with iron straps, but it had been cared for. The wood had a dull sheen, as if it had been oiled recently. It looked completely out of place, like a piece of formal furniture dropped into a ruin. It wasn't locked. I approached it cautiously, my heart thudding against my ribs. What was this? I knelt down, my jeans soaking up the damp from the dirt floor, and placed my hands on the lid. It was heavy, solid wood. I hesitated for a moment, 100 wild possibilities running through my mind. Then, I lifted the lid. The inside was not filled with treasure, or old tools, or any of the things I might have imagined. It was filled with paper. Stacks and stacks of manila envelopes, all of them neatly organized, each one labeled in a precise, familiar handwriting. My grandfather's handwriting. On the very top of the pile was a single, thick envelope, thicker than the rest. On it, in that same steady script, were 2 lines. For Leo, when you're ready. My breath caught in my chest. This was it. This was the answer. The reason for the key, the barn, all of it. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely break the wax seal he'd pressed into the back of the envelope. I pulled out a thick sheaf of papers, dozens of pages filled with that same handwriting, front and back. I sat down on the dusty floor, leaned my back against the chest, aimed my phone's light at the first page, and began to read. My dear Leo, it began. If you are reading this, it means 2 things. First, that I am gone, and second, that you have come home. I am sorry for the state of the place. It's not much of a home, I know, but it is the only piece of this land, our land, that I could save. I hope you can forgive me for that, and for so much more. I had to stop and take a ragged breath. Hearing his voice, so clear in my mind as I read his words, was like a punch to the gut. It was a voice I hadn't heard in 2 years, a voice I thought I was starting to forget. I read on, my world shrinking to the cone of light from my phone and the black ink on the page. He told me the story I thought I knew, but every detail was wrong. He hadn't lost the farm to bad luck or a few poor harvests. He had been targeted. A development corporation, a subsidiary of a larger, faceless company called Stonegate Holdings, had come to town with smiles and promises. They wanted the land, all of it, for a new suburban development, Maple Creek Estates. They offered to buy out the local farmers, but the offers were insults. When the farmers refused, the company changed tactics. They worked through a local bank they had acquired, offering farmers like my grandfather consolidation loans with predatory terms, hidden clauses, and balloon payments that were impossible to meet. It was a deliberate, systematic campaign to strangle them with debt, to force them into foreclosure, and to pick up their land for pennies on the dollar. It was legal, just barely, but it was wrong. "I was a fool, Leo," he wrote. "I was proud. I thought I could outwork the debt. I took one of their loans to buy a new harvester, thinking one good season was all I needed. But they knew what they were doing. They timed the payment schedules to hit in the off-season. They buried fees in the fine print. By the time I realized what was happening, the hole was too deep. I fought them. I got a lawyer, a good man, but he was outmatched. They had a team of them, an army of suits from the city. They bled me dry in court, and then they took the farm." I could feel the shame and anger rolling off the page, the quiet, simmering rage of a man who had been cheated out of his life's work. My image of him as a man who had simply been defeated by circumstance shattered. He hadn't been defeated, he had been robbed. But the story didn't end there. After he lost the farm, he didn't just give up and fade away. He started digging. He spent the last 5 years of his life secretly, obsessively, investigating Stonegate Holdings. He talked to other families who had lost their land. He went through public records. He learned how to use a computer at the town library, this man who had spent his life working with his hands. He built a case. He wrote, "These people, they weren't just sharks, Leo. They were criminals. They forged documents. They bribed a county official to get zoning changes approved. They used shell companies to hide their assets. What they did to us here, they've done in a dozen other small towns just like ours. They are a cancer spreading across the country, hollowing out communities and leaving nothing but debt and regret behind." The other envelopes in the chest, he explained, contained everything, every piece of evidence. Copies of fraudulent loan documents, sworn affidavits from other farmers, financial records he'd pieced together from weeks of research, and on a set of old cassette tapes at the bottom of the chest, recorded conversations. He had worn a wire. My grandfather, the quietest man I had ever known, had worn a wire and met with the very people who had ruined him, baiting them into admitting their scheme. The cot in the tack room, the lantern, the canned food, it all made sense now. He had been using the barn as his base of operations. He had been living out here, alone, in the cold, gathering his ammunition for one last fight. He was protecting me, keeping his dangerous work separate from my new life at college. He didn't want me involved. He didn't want me to worry. The letter was nearing its end. I was getting close, Leo. I could feel it. I had found a young lawyer, a firebrand, named Evelyn Albright, who believed me. She was helping me put the final pieces together. We were planning to take the evidence to the state attorney general. But my heart, it seems, had other plans. It's a tired old motor, and it's about to give out. I can feel it. So I have to leave this to you. And I am so sorry for that. This is not the inheritance any man should leave his grandson. It is a burden. It is a war. And you have every right to walk away. My hands were numb. My face was wet with tears I hadn't even realized I was crying. I cried for my grandfather, for the lonely, secret life he had lived in his final years. I cried for his courage, for the sheer, stubborn refusal to be broken. And I cried for myself, for the lost, scared kid sitting in the dark, a universe of responsibility crashing down on him. Then I read the final page, the one that laid out the choice. At the bottom of this chest, he wrote, under a false floor, you will find all the cash I have left in the world. It's just over $50,000. I saved it for you. It's clean, untraceable. You can take it, Leo. Take it and disappear. Go build a new life for yourself, far away from all this ugliness. Go back to school. Buy a car. Be young. No one would ever blame you. I would not blame you. That is one path. The other is to finish what I started, to take this evidence to Ms. Albright, to give these people, our people, their voice back. It is the harder path. It is dangerous. Stonegate is not a company that plays fair. They will try to silence you, to bury you, to break you. But if you choose this path, you will not be alone. The truth will be on your side, and I will be with you, always. The choice is yours. Whatever you decide, know that I love you, and I am proud of the man you have become. Your grandfather, Arthur. I sat there in the crushing silence of the barn, the letter trembling in my hands. $50,000. It was a fortune. It was a get-out-of-jail-free card. It was the easy answer to every single one of my problems. I could leave this town, leave this barn, leave this whole mess behind. I could re-enroll in a different college. I could get an apartment. I could be anonymous. I could be safe. The weight of that possibility was immense. I found the false bottom in the chest, just as he said. It was a thin sheet of cedar, perfectly fitted. I lifted it out, and there it was. Stacks of $100 bills wrapped in rubber bands. It smelled faintly of cedar and earth. It was real. My escape was real. I thought about the dean's face, the pity in his eyes. I thought about my aunt's polite but firm rejection. I thought about the cold drizzle and the long, lonely walk to this place. The money was a warm light in a cold world. It was a promise of comfort, of a life without this struggle. All I had to do was close the chest, walk away, and forget. Forget the evidence. Forget the other families. Forget my grandfather's last request. I could just take the money and run. And for a long, terrible moment, I wanted to. I wanted to more than anything. Listen, if you've ever been faced with a choice that felt too big for you, a choice where the easy path was right there, whispering your name, I need you to know you're not alone. The temptation to just make the pain stop, to take the simple way out, it's powerful. It's a siren song, and it takes every ounce of who you are to resist it. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to choose the harder right. We're a community here. We understand that struggle, and your story matters. I spent the night in the tack room, on my grandfather's cot, wrapped in his wool blanket. I didn't sleep. I just lay there in the dark, the sound of the rain drumming on the tin roof, a constant, rhythmic beat. The flashlight battery had died, and the darkness was absolute. It was a physical presence pressing in on me. With every gust of wind that rattled the old barn, I felt the weight of my grandfather's life, his fight, his sacrifice. He hadn't died of a broken heart. He had died a soldier in a war I never knew he was fighting. He had spent his last years out here, in this cold, lonely place, not for revenge, but for justice, for me. He had saved that money not just as an escape route, but as a test. He was asking me, from beyond the grave, what kind of man I was. Was I Arthur Vance's grandson, or was I just some kid who got scared and ran? The $50,000 sat in the chest, a silent, potent argument. I could picture the life it could buy me. A small, clean apartment, a reliable car, a new set of textbooks. The quiet, uncomplicated life of a student. No lawyers, no powerful corporations, no risk, just a clean slate. But what would that life be built on? It would be built on ignoring the truth. It would be built on my grandfather's final unanswered plea. Every dollar I spent would feel like a betrayal, Every comfortable night in a warm bed would be haunted by the knowledge that I had left his life's work to rot in a dusty chest in a forgotten barn. The money wasn't a gift. It was a price. It was the price of my silence, the price of my conscience. As the first hint of gray light began to filter through the cracks in the walls, a fragile dawn breaking over the fields, my choice became clear. It settled over me not like a lightning strike, but like the slow, quiet clearing of a fog. I couldn't run. I wouldn't. My grandfather had left me more than a barn and a box of evidence. He had left me a purpose. My own life had felt so pointless, so adrift for the past 2 years. A series of classes I was losing interest in, a future I couldn't quite picture. Now, here was something real, something that mattered. It was terrifying. It was overwhelming. But for the first time in a long time, it was a direction. I got up from the cot, my body stiff and cold. I walked back to the chest. I carefully placed the letter back in its envelope. I put the false bottom back in place, over the money. And then I closed the lid. The money would stay here. It wasn't for running. It was a war chest. I found Ms. Albright's business card tucked into the pocket of the main envelope. Albright and Associates, Public Interest Law. The address was in a city about an hour's drive away. I used the last of my phone's battery to look up the bus schedule. The first one left at 8 a.m. I gathered the most important-looking documents, what seemed to be the master file my grandfather had compiled, and the cassette tapes, and put them in my backpack. I left the chest, the money, and the rest of the files hidden in the barn. I secured the padlock, looped the chain back on the gate, and started the long walk back to town. The rain had stopped. The air was clean and crisp. The world felt new. The law office was on the second floor of an old brick building, above a coffee shop. The sign on the door was modest. Inside, the office was small, cluttered with stacks of paper and law books, but it was bright and clean. A young woman at the front desk looked up when I came in. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm here to see Evelyn Albright," I said. "My name is Leo Vance." Her eyes widened slightly. "One moment." She disappeared into an office and came back a few seconds later. "She'll see you now." Evelyn Albright was not what I expected. She was young, maybe in her early 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense energy that seemed to fill the small room. She wore a simple black blazer and had her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wasn't smiling. She stood up and shook my hand. Her grip was firm. "Mr. Vance," she said, "I've been expecting you. Please, sit." I sat in the chair opposite her desk. It was piled high with files, but the one directly in front of her was labeled Vance, Arthur. "I was very sorry to hear about your grandfather," she said, her tone softening for the first time. "He was a remarkable man, tenacious. I've never had a client like him." "He left me this," I said, my voice cracking slightly. I unzipped my backpack and laid the file and the cassette tapes on her desk. "He left me everything." She looked at the file, then back at me. Her expression was hard to read. It was a mixture of sympathy and professional assessment. She was sizing me up. "I know this is a lot to take in," she said carefully. "Your grandfather understood the weight of what he was asking. He made me promise that if you ever came to me, the first thing I would do is explain exactly what you are up against." And she did. For the next hour, she laid it all out in stark, unflinching detail. Stonegate Holdings was a multi-million-dollar corporation with a reputation for aggressive litigation. They had a team of high-priced lawyers who specialized in crushing lawsuits from nuisances, as she put it. They would file endless motions to bleed us dry. They would try to discredit my grandfather, to paint him as a disgruntled old man with a grudge. They would investigate me, looking for any dirt, any weakness they could exploit. They will try to make this so expensive, so exhausting, and so personally painful that you will give up, she said, her eyes locked on mine. That's their strategy. It's not about justice for them. It's about attrition. Can you handle that? She told me that my grandfather's evidence was strong, especially the tapes. It was the smoking gun. But a smoking gun is useless if you can't get it into the right courtroom, in front of the right judge. And that would be a fight. A long one. This won't be over in a month or even a year, she said. We could be looking at 2-3 years of fighting before we even get a trial date. And there are no guarantees we'll win. She leaned forward, her hands clasped on the desk. Your grandfather also told me about the money he left you. He wanted you to have a choice. He made me promise I wouldn't pressure you. So I'm telling you now, Leo, you can walk out of this office and no one, least of all me, will think less of you. You can take that money and live your life. This doesn't have to be your fight. I looked at her, at the quiet intensity in her eyes. She wasn't trying to scare me off. She was testing me. She was making sure I understood the reality of the war my grandfather had started. I thought about the barn, about the quiet dignity of that space. I thought about the name on the file on her desk. Vance. It was my name. He didn't give up, I said, my voice steadier now. I'm not going to either. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of her mouth. It was the first time I'd seen her look anything other than serious. Good, she said. I was hoping you'd say that. Your grandfather had a feeling you would. Now, let's get to work. Tell me everything you know. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. The first thing I did was use a small portion of the money from the chest to buy supplies. I wasn't going to let my grandfather's last refuge fall apart. I bought lumber, shingles, nails, and sheets of thick plastic to cover the broken windows. I spent my days on the roof of the barn, hammering in new shingles under the autumn sun. The work was hard, physical, and deeply satisfying. Every nail I drove was an affirmation. Every patched hole was a small victory against the decay. I was literally rebuilding my house, piece by piece. I found an old wood-burning stove at a scrapyard and installed it in the main area, running the pipe up through a hole in the roof. For the first time, the barn had warmth. It was beginning to feel less like a shelter and more like a home. In the evenings, by the light of the lantern and the glow of the fire, I worked on the case. Ms. Albright had given me a task, to transcribe the cassette tapes. I bought an old player from a thrift store, and, night after night, I sat at a makeshift desk I'd built from old planks, headphones on, listening to my grandfather's voice. It was grueling, emotional work. I heard him talking to bankers, to lawyers, to smarmy real estate agents from Stonegate. I heard the condescension in their voices, the slick, practiced way they dodged his questions. And I heard the quiet, unshakable resolve in his. He was patient. He let them talk, let them incriminate themselves, his voice a calm, steady counterpoint to their corporate doublespeak. I typed every word, every pause, every sigh. I was becoming an archivist of his courage. Ms. Albright began the legal assault. She filed a massive civil suit against Stonegate Holdings on behalf of my grandfather's estate and 3 other families who, buoyed by the new evidence, had agreed to join the fight. They were people I vaguely remembered from my childhood. The Millers, who had the dairy farm down the road. The Garcias, who ran the apple orchard. Old, tired people who had been convinced they had no fight left in them. I went with Ms. Albright to meet them. At first, They were wary. I was just a kid, a reminder of a past they had tried to forget. But when I played them a section of one of the tapes, when they heard my grandfather's voice calmly trapping a Stonegate executive in a lie, I saw the spark return to their eyes. Hope, I realized, was a fragile but powerful thing. Stonegate responded exactly as Ms. Albright had predicted. Their lawyers filed a motion to dismiss, calling the lawsuit frivolous and without merit. They sent a private investigator to my aunt's house, asking questions about me. They were trying to dig up dirt. My aunt called me, her voice a mixture of fear and frustration. "Leo, what have you gotten yourself into? These are dangerous people." I tried to explain, but I could tell she didn't understand. To her, I was just making trouble. Then came the offer. A sleek black car drove up the muddy track to the barn one afternoon. A man in an expensive suit got out, looking around at the property with a look of distaste. He introduced himself as a representative from Stonegate. He didn't offer his hand. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice smooth and cold, "my employers are prepared to be generous. They understand your sentimental attachment to this property. They are willing to offer you $250,000 for this 1 acre. Cash. You sign a non-disclosure agreement, you drop this ridiculous lawsuit, and you walk away with $250,000. He said it so casually, as if it were nothing. $250,000. The number hung in the air, shimmering. It was life-changing money. It was more money than my grandfather had seen in his entire life. The man smiled, a thin, predatory smile. "It's a good deal, kid. The best you're ever going to get. Take it. Go live your life." For a second, just a second, the image of that easy life flashed through my mind again. But this time, it had no power over me. I looked at the man, at his perfect suit and his polished shoes standing in the mud of my home. I thought of my grandfather, living out here in the cold, fighting for something more than money. He was fighting for his name, for his dignity. "The barn's not for sale," I said. His smile vanished. "You're making a mistake, kid." "No," I said, turning to walk back inside. "I'm not." I heard his car door slam, and the sound of his tires spinning in the mud as he drove away. The offer wasn't a sign of their strength. It was a sign of their fear. They were scared of what was in that chest. They were scared of the truth. I stood in the massive doorway of the barn, looking out at the land. It was early winter now. The trees were bare, their branches like dark veins against a pale sky. A light snow was beginning to fall, dusting the fields in a thin layer of white. The air was cold and clean. Inside, the fire in the stove was crackling, a steady beating heart in the center of the big room. The barn wasn't a ruin anymore. It was a fortress. It was my home. The legal battle was far from over. There would be more motions, more threats, more long and difficult days. But for the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was and what I was supposed to be doing. My grandfather had left me a choice between a fortune and a fight. I had chosen the fight, and in doing so, I had found a different kind of fortune. I had found purpose. I had found community. I had found a connection to the man who raised me that was stronger than death itself. An inheritance, I've learned, isn't just something you are given. It's something you choose to accept. It's the story you choose to carry forward. My grandfather had started the story, a story of justice against overwhelming odds. He had passed the pen to me, and I was going to write a hell of an ending. They say home is a place, but I learned it's a choice. It's the choice to stand for something, to protect the people and the memories that made you. My grandfather left me a broken-down barn, but he gave me a mission, and in the end, that was the greatest inheritance of all. What you inherit isn't always about money or property. Sometimes it's a story that needs an ending. It's a fight that needs a fighter. If this story meant something to you, if it made you think about your own legacy, please subscribe and join our community. We believe in the power of these stories, the ones about picking yourself up and choosing the harder path. And I want you to tell me in the comments, what's the most important thing someone has ever left for you? It doesn't have to be something you can hold. It can be a piece of advice, a memory, a standard to live up to. I'll be reading every single one. Thank you for listening.